Thank you, Marian. Nice to be with you again, and wonderful to be with our congregants and friends. Also, my friend from as far away as the States, Cape Town, Johannesburg, wherever. It's lovely to be back with you. This week, we begin the last of the 5 books of Moses, Devarim. And Devarim means words in English. I think you remember last week, I chose to discuss from the Parasha Matot, which is all about vows. And ultimately, when you studied that parasha, the vows came back to what we say, words. It is also called Deuteronomy, from the Greek meaning second law, Deuteros number 2, and nomos law. Probably because this is the second time Moses repeats many of the laws he's already taught the people through their wanderings in the desert, because he knows that he is going to die, and he knows that he wants to find a way of getting them to remember every one of these laws, how they must think and act when they get to the promised land. It's very different thinking and acting as slaves in Egypt, where you're told what to do. Everything is set for you, and within those parameters, you live somehow a decent life. But here, the Israelites were going into a land they knew nothing of. And the most important thing, they were going into freedom and to achieve goodness, to achieve justice, to achieve life for all those with you during freedom is very different from living under an absolute rule and law. Something that many people forget, that is of this massive crowd of people that left Israel, many, some believe even more than 20%, were not Jewish. They were also slaves that the Egyptians, from Egypt, yes, Brian. They were also slaves that were working for the pharaohs and the Egyptians, not only building the pyramids, but just servicing the land. And they decided to leave with the Jewish people. And Moses, Hashem, and the promised land accepted them totally as part of our people. So we have always been a people with a stranger amongst us, and they've always been accepted as one of us and treated as equal citizens. So let us get back here. Moses repeats many of the laws of the Torah to prepare the Jewish people for entering and living in the land of Israel. The book is really, the whole of Devarim is the oration of Moses, the speech of Moses before he dies. And he reviews the entire history of the 40 years of wandering in the desert. He reviews, as I said, all the laws and gives rebuke, chides the Jewish people and tells them, please learn from your mistakes. So often the sages feel that if someone as great as Moses repeats everything just before he dies, and the nation knows that he's not going with them into the land of the promised land of Israel, you listen much more clearly to his voice. You listen, the words mean so much more to you, and it stays in your mind. So let's just investigate that a little bit further. The 40 years that the Jewish people wandered in the Sinai desert, the Jews and the people who joined them, they just became one large people. And the prophecies regarding their future, this is what Moses was telling them. He had that extraordinary ability to understand human nature in such a way that not only was he preparing them, the Jewish people, for a new land they knew nothing of, and to put in the correct laws, justice, and implement what was to become Western democracy, and is, for example, the Constitution of South Africa. And I'm not sure, Reg will tell us, I think America also has a type of constitution that is all based on the laws of the Old Testament. And Moses was getting this into their heads before they would go into that land. Now, people ask, why is Moses' speech at this stage connected to each of the stations, each of the places in the deserts they stopped at? Why was that necessary? Rashi, our famous commentator and rabbi, following the ideas of Midrash, explains that the locations were identified by Moses and linked to what happened in that place. So, for example, they would know exactly where, for example, they had started crying, that they were sick of the manna, they wanted other food, or that there was no water, or where they built the golden calf. So, for Rashi explains that the locations were not so much meant to be exact geographical location, but points of their journey which they could identify with a probable location and the event that happened there. This is the sort of thing that makes it so much easier for us to remember these very important rules of building a life in a new land when we have other ideas to connect them with in our head. So we have a rule that there is so many interpretations of eternal words. Everyone, all the rabbis interpret it differently. I talk about what touches me when I'm reading up. So there's many different interpretations to the same words. But the Torah always cautions us that we should always be aware of what the Torah really means. The simple explanation of words is also the most important part of our values and our message. We don't have to always look for 1,000 different intellectual, complicated meanings. The listing of these geographic locations where Moshe begins his speech to the Jewish people is just an intrinsic value all by itself, because he wants them to remember the event he's talking about. Moshe wants us, Moses would like us to realize when and where and under what circumstances the message to the Jewish people is being delivered. Just simply that. By describing the place from which he was speaking and giving it context and background. All statements, no matter from whom and no matter how profound or simple, must be understood in the context of the place and time before we can then have much more sophisticated understanding of how it would apply in our days. So let's understand and let's really see in such vivid clarity Moses, when he spoke to them, where he was, what he said, the rock he struck, whatever, because it was real. It is difficult to communicate messages to a generation that is living miraculously in a barren desert. How do you explain to them what's going to happen? The audience must require great imagination to be able to remember and to deal with all those promises and issues concerning a place they've never yet been or never even seen. It is very difficult to speak to people about the future, which is always uncertain. There is no guarantee. How many of us can talk with absolute certainty about the future today And forgive this analogy, as we wander now in a desert of post-COVID that's still hanging around, of a war, of a world, perhaps and perhaps not on the precipice of a war, of seeing things we never thought we would believe. A dictator, Putin, trying to get us back to the 18th century. It's unknown, the future. And it's not easy to communicate a message to people when they're facing the unknown and the uncertain. To a great extent, tomorrow, the next day, the future is mysterious. None of us could have predicted COVID. We had our plans set. None of us could have predicted this war. We had our plans set. But Moses managed with this brilliant speech to address both issues. He managed through his speech not only to get the laws of how to live and how to build freedom and democracy and how to handle each other, how to handle the stranger, how to handle those who have not, the widow, the orphan, etc., how to fight all things that are wrong. He managed to get that message not only to those people in the desert about a place they'd never seen, but to you and I living right here today. Can you believe that? In the 21st century, and in a way we would never have known, in a way a frightening yesterday, but still a frightening today, frightening tomorrow, and yet we've been guided by the words of Moses, of Hashem, of Torah, to know that we'll make it, that we'll follow the laws to the best of our ability, we'll treat each other with kindness and respect, we'll look after those who are different faith, different nationality, who are suffering, and somehow just doing that, we will keep the hope that Moses instilled in those people, those Israelites, in spite of all the mistakes they made, in spite of all the times he got upset with them, he still knew this is humanity. And so he projected a message that has lasted for thousands of years and is as valid and vital wherever one finds themselves today on any part of the planet. And it's a message that's reached across all religions and all people. And that is what makes Moses the greatest of all prophets of the Jewish people in all areas of life, and Baruch Hashem for all eternity. Shabbat Shalom.